I've been asked to do a little brief video on the different scales that are available for wargaming and some thoughts on it. So here is a little bit of a brief guide to what scales are available. It's not exhaustive, it's only covering the ones I have. But we'll start small and we'll go up. So right at the far side, we have, I'll try to get a closer picture for it as well, hang on a second. So our first scale that I got miniatures for is 6mm. As you can see, looking at the size of my finger compared to it, that LRDG truck is absolutely tiny. This is a very good scale if you're going to do really big sort of mass battles, some naval battles. I think Cruel Seas is 6mm. Most naval things are a lot smaller than 6mm, but 6mm covers the sort of patrol boats for Cruel Seas. I use these little fellas as ground targets for Blood Red Skies. You could use them for large sort of battalion maybe or above size games. Maybe even good up sort of division, who knows. They're usually multi-base. This is a vehicle on basically a 20mm base. So infantry are multi-based and they're used in the sort of grand scale battles. We don't play any large scale 6mm stuff here, apart from obviously these use as targets for Blood Red Skies and Cruel Seas is 6mm, but we take that into other campaigns. There are a few rule sets that you could use for this. Blitzkrieg Commander for World War II, Cold War Commander, they both lend themselves well to 6mm. Likewise, some of the ancient ones and Napoleonic period with a little bit of adjustment. I've got a pile of 6mm Napoleonics from Adler miniatures. Currently sitting, waiting to be painted for Napoleonics, but I've just got such a backlog, I haven't got round to it. So that's 6mm. I'll pull the next scale out as well, so you can see the difference as we move up. This, if I can get it to focus on the little small chaps. It doesn't want to, does it? Really doesn't want to focus. There you go. Those are Pendraken 10mm. Again, these are based up to be used in black powder. They're 10mm usually gets multi-based. This isn't working. It's so small and I gotta zoom in. That's the trouble. The 10mm is usually multi-based. Used to the larger games. There's a lot of pseudo 10mm, sort of 12mm coming out, which is somewhere in between 10 and 15. I believe Warlord have got it with their new English Civil War. Victrix have got it for their World War II. 10-12mm is a really good scale if you want to do sort of company level or maybe a little bit bigger games. You could, at company level, easily represent one-on-one. Most games that use 10mm, this just represents a unit block, so it could be 120 men, depending on the ground scale, which we'll cover later, and the rules that you particularly choose. So those are sort of your grand scale 10 and 6mm. So move the 6mm aside and we'll bring in some 15mm. Again, hang on a second, let's see if I can get some better light down to these. It's a little bit better, we've got some light down on them now. So moving up to the 15mm, again, they tend to be multi-based, though at the moment I'm starting an individually based 15mm project for Chain of Command, because when we talk about ground skills at the end, Chain of Command is basically at 50mm ground scale. So I've got some Flames of War, I think, plastics that I'm going to base up individually and put on movement trays to use for Chain of Command to have got that, because I've got loads of 50mm scenery. 50mm is very common in Ancients and the Napoleonic period, as well as World War II. I haven't got any of my 50mm World War II to show you because my new project's not started yet, and my Flames of War and Battle Group stuff is in the attic, and it's far too cold today to go up there. Mainly because I have to go outside and get the ladder in, which is a pain, because it snowed here. 50mm again, it's a little bit more character on the models. You can do a little bit more effort than 10. So a little bit more detail that you need to cover. They're quite fun to paint. We've got museum miniatures, is Hollywood Spartans here, being very 300-y, and I believe Essex, British Napoleonic, I think Peninsula or Light Infantry. So again, these scales tend themselves to bigger battles, and often is the case, though not always, one model represents more than one. I mean, in the Napoleonic ones, I think it's like a 1 to 20 maybe in that unit. Likewise for the Ancients, I guess. These are based up for DBA and Mortar Mechlorium. So that's the game they're going to be used for. You could do individual. Flames of War uses a 1-to-1 mapping with the men. Looks really good. Again, at 50mm, no worries doing company level games. You'll have my thoughts on what scale and to do games at the end, but I'm just covering the scales for the first part. The next one we have is the 20mm scale. Now, this is quite a popular scale because it's your 172, 176, depending on what end of it you go. And there's a lot of Airfix and other firms make kits, so it's very popular for World War II. What you do have to be very careful of is these are two different plastic providers who are both labelled as being 20mm. The one on the left is Plastic Soldier, and the one on the right is Valiant. Now, if I had to guess, I'd say the Valiant is closer to 25mm. But 25mm sort of ebbed out of popularity. It used to be a very popular one in the sort of 80s, 90s, but as miniature companies have had scale creep and they've moved up to 28, 25 sort of been a bit unloved. So it's kind of dropped down to be roped into the 20mm, I guess, in some cases. So yeah, with the 20mm, you have to be very careful on the actual scale of the models you buy. There's a very good website, Plastic Soldier Review, that lists the actual size of the models and stuff. So if you want to match a particular scale, you can. I find your Plastic Soldier company are quite good. I think Adler's 20mm are a little bit bigger, a little bit chunkier. There are some that are a little bit smaller. It's very much the case of you need to look around with the 20mm. As you can see, I don't really do 20mm gaming. I've got some that I need that are in the painting project. I just pulled them out for some scale comparison so you can see what they're like. So that's 20mm. As I said, very popular with World War II. Nice scale. Again, you could probably do a company level with not much problem. Platoon level is easy. Now we're on to 28mm. It's by far my favourite scale because I like painting the detail on the men and making the men sort of stand out and be identifiable on camera and stuff. These are a selection of World War II miniatures. I also got some Napoleonic in this scale, Ancients in this scale, Wild West. Ooh, what else we got? I think Dark Ages, Medieval Period, lots. There's countless model firms making models in this scale. It is important, however, to find a style that you like. Due to I paint and let friends play with the models, I prefer plastic miniatures if possible. So I'm a bit more limited because plastic miniatures at the end of the day are easier to deal with when people drop them and break them. So here are a selection of different World War II models from different providers. So it is worth noting that although they're all 28, and they're all roughly, if they were standing tall, probably the same height, there is differences in the proportions. So these two are both Warlord game metal miniatures. If we can focus. Focus. I need it. I need a new camera for this. So that's the pattern that comes with the bolt action rulebook and a late war here platoon sergeant. As you can see, they're quite chunky, but the pattern is a bit less chunky than the German. Now, next door to that, if I switch them around, that is an artisan's design German sniper. So again, proportionally not too dissimilar, a bit less sort of bulky than the Warlord one, a bit sort of taller and more lean, but a different sculpting style. So he's a little bit more cartoony, maybe, in some respects, and realistic in others. A nice kit, but a different style. So you have to be very, very careful about mix and matching some of these. Now we have a Rubicon Monty. As you can see, the style on this now is a lot more realistic. It's like some of the Forge World models compared to some of the Games Workshop models, for example. The proportions are much more natural. It's much less heroic. So, again, caution needs to be taken if you mix and match them in the same force. As you can see, mine's painted for the desert, and these are painted, and the other miniatures are painted for Northern Europe, so there's not much of an issue. And then we have one of the Perry 28mm plastic Desert Rats. That fits nicely with the Rubicon model. They have the same proportions. So I've kept, for my North Africa, my Mediterranean, I've kept with the Perry and some Rubicon stuff. And for my Northern Europe, I've mainly kept with the Warlord stuff. I haven't got any of the new Wargames Atlantic stuff yet, but I'm going to be getting the Partisans and the French when they come out. So I could add them to the comparison maybe at a later date. Then we have the, I don't know what scale to call it. It's ostensibly meant to be 28, but I think it's now 32. And even then, it's a little bit more heroic, which is your standard Games Workshop. So I remember when, in fact, if you wait a second, I will get a model to help me remember. So I've grabbed some really old school GW miniatures, so we can see scale creep over the years. The Scientist, which is, I believe, from the Talisman range, way back. That fits in nicely with the Warlord stuff. So that's 25 to 28. You can see the weird proportions they used to do. The hands are very giant. Then we have a Rogue Trader era Inquisitor in Terminator Armor. As you can see, despite wearing Terminator Armor, he's still smaller than the normal human standing next door to him who's wearing carapace. So over the years, the scale has gone up a bit. So that's a brief overview of some of the different scales. I say it's very brief, and it doesn't cover all the scales, but it covers some of the more popular ones. Now, what's left to cover is what scale's right for you, and when we say ground scale, what do we mean? It is quite customary in miniature wargaming that miniature scale and ground scale are kind of different. A good example I mentioned in Chain of Command, the ground scale is 15mm, which means that 12 inches is roughly 40 yards, so you can extrapolate ranges from that, etc., etc. It does matter that we use bigger models to represent the soldiers, but the ground scale is the same. The ground scale is 15mm. So if you want a more natural experience of what the battlefield would look like, you need 50mm terrain and 15mm buildings and miniatures. It gets a bit weirder with certain games and certain styles of play. When I say weirder, I mean if you think of the ground scale that is implied in bolt action, for example, at first glance it doesn't make any sense at all. So assume an engagement range for a rifle is about 300 yards, and a rifle in bolt action's got a range of 24 inches. So 24 inches is about 300-ish yards, give or take. Right. So if 24 inches is 300 yards, that makes 12 inches 160 yards. But the scenery you use is 28mm. And it basically means, for example, if you buy the Sarissa or the foreground Pegasus Bridge, your guns don't necessarily have the range to shoot across it. Why is this the case? Bolt action doesn't have a linear ground scale. A decision was made way back in bolt action's development, similar to things that have been made in other futuristic, slightly grimdarky type games, that they want the ability to have the big tanks, the big artillery, and close combat all on the same battlefield. And realistically, you can't do that, because if you think a medium mortar is going to have a minimum range of about 70 yards, maybe 50. That if you give that as a minimum range, then if you use 28mm ground skills, it's off the board. It's not shooting anybody. And think things like a Sturmtiger. A Sturmtiger's got rules in bolt action, whereas the blast radius is something like 150 yards from its explosion, engaged at about 5 kilometers away maybe, and wasn't accurate enough to land a shell on a big bridge. So in game terms, it being able to hit where you want to is unlikely, but it landing on the board would probably kill everybody on it, unless you do something about the ground scale. So they use a system called a telescopic ground scale, which means that they pick a range band, say, for rifles. Rifles, mid-range weapons, say 24 inches. Anything with less range, submachine guns, pistols, go a lower end, and anything with a longer range, go up. But that going up isn't linear, so you just use telescopic bands. So you may use 0 to 6 inches is one scale, 6 to 12 is another, 12 to 24 is another scale, 24 to 36 is another scale leap, 36 to 48 is, now you've got another difference in range between, say, a tripod-mounted machine gun and a 75mm anti-tank gun. And that difference in range, that sort of exponential range bracketing, allows them to have multiple weapon systems on a battlefield that shouldn't necessarily be all fighting in the same place, targeting each other. It allows for you to buy whatever you want and field whatever you want in the game. Does make, a bit of issue with realism, like I said, that it is the case that some weapons can't target across a bridge. Some weapons, for example, struggle to hit somebody at the other end of a German mouse tank, which, as we all know, is farcical, but it's a result of this telescopic range, because what you're seeing isn't a linear range band. It's basically everything's bracketed, so a sniper rifle has a longer range than a rifle, has less range than a medium anti-tank gun, has less range than a heavy anti-tank gun, and so on and so forth. The other time that you run into some weirdness with ground scales is your multi-based games. Now, it is typical that your scenery gets built to match the scale of your miniatures. But when you go to your 10mm or your 50mm, there is a lot of suspension of disbelief required. Because if, as I said, It's alright in games like Flames of War, where you've got a 1-to-1 mapping, or if you played I Ain't Been Shot Mum with 15mm, or even Chain of Command at 15mm. Because you'll be mapping 1-to-1, that would be fine. The ground scale would match, and everything would look normal. It gets a bit weird when you stop mapping in 1-to-1. So, for example, in Black Powder, a unit's made up of certain bases, and a base could be 100 men, and it may only have 4, 8, 6 models, and depending on how you've based them. So realistically, you'd have your piece of scenery, and those 4 men would look good sitting on it. But what you've got, if you were to extend the scale logic out, is you've got 120 men sitting in one hovel, which stops making sense. So as you go to the multi-base, you have to suspend a little bit of belief. There's a suspension of disbelief on the actual scenery, but in that scale, you've got to think about that's not one building; it's a series of buildings. It may be a small farmstead. It may be a small town. So that one building doesn't represent one building; it represents a built-up area. So once you make that mental leap that it's not a 1-to-1 anymore, then it's fine. What scale suits you best? What do you like? I like 28mm. Cost sometimes, in some cases, could be an issue, but there's a lot of good plastics out there now, and the way I base my 15mm, it costs roughly the same for me to do a unit in 28mm as it does in 15mm. If you think 15mm are probably somewhere in between £3.50 and £4 for 8 English money. Which means that if you're going to base them in, say, 6 units of 8, that's somewhere in the region of £24-ish, give or take, for a unit. Yeah. Add an extra bit to have some command and banners in there, because you'd want half and half. So you're really buying 9. So you're buying about somewhere between £25 and £35 per unit. If you were to look at, for example, Perry's 28mm plastics, you get, depending on the kit, somewhere in the region of 40 plastics for £20. Which means that if you buy 2 boxes or 3 boxes, you get enough for 2-3 units and so on. And it works out cheaper. But what isn't cheaper is getting all the terrain for it, because getting terrain for 10, 15, 6mm, it's quite easy to make your own, because it's quite abstracted. They don't need much detail. I've 3D printed a few 6mm houses for the Napoleonics, for example. They look great because they're so small. If they were in 28mm, they'd look rubbish, and I'd have to buy expensive ones. And that is one of the big problems with expense in 28mm. As you go bigger, the miniatures tend to get not that much more expensive in some cases, due to mass production and plastics. However, the scenery goes through the roof. I mean, I've got a La Haye Sant in 15mm that I think it's a sort of solid resin piece, and it cost me £35 maybe. Whereas to buy the MDF one at 28mm from like Foreground is what, nearly £300. So there is a huge difference in cost there. The other problem is room. If you're going to play on a 6x4, for example, and you're going to try and do a Napoleonic battle, you may want to look at one of the smaller scales, because the units are quite big. Frontage-wise, you're talking about a unit that could go up to 12-inch frontage. So if you're in a reasonable sized game, you need bigger than a 6x4. I'm quite lucky in that I've got an 8x6. So 28mm is not too much of a problem. I would quite like it to be longer, so I ideally like a 12x5, because I'm a bit short and reaching across the middle's tricksy. But that's less doable for me because of the nature of the room I've got. But, you know, needs must, so an 8x6 will do. So that roughly covers scale. Most games, apart from obviously certain ones, are quite scale agnostic. Black Powder, for example, there's nothing stopping you playing in 10mm, not 28mm, and use centimetres, not inches. That gives you a much bigger battle in a much smaller space, which is quite good. There's nothing stopping you do that for other games. I wouldn't do it with Chain of Command, because as I said, it is a 50mm ground scale. We just use bigger models, and it's only platoon level anyway. So, but yeah, if you're stuck for space, knocking it down a scale or two, switching from inches to centimeters, often works really, really well without any like mental gymnastics that can confuse people. Because it sounds patronizing, but even dividing by 2, it's something, unless you do all the sheets and print them out with the new numbers on, in the heat of the game, it's very easy to forget you're meant to divide that number by 2. It's happened to the best of us, and, you know, all the goodwill in the world, a couple of slip-ups like that could skew a game. We've all seen it happen. I've seen it happen years back with a game that was released in centimeters, but all the rest of the games done by that company were in inches. So by default, the person I was playing against assumed inches and started measuring inches, which didn't work that well. So I hope this has covered a little bit about what scales to use. For World War II, my favourite's 28. There's loads of stuff out there. But also 20mm. If it wasn't for having to buy a complete new set of scenery, I'd probably, if I was starting afresh in World War II, I would probably go the 20mm route, on the account of it's really cheap, and there's a lot of stuff out there for it, and scale-wise, because they're individually based anyway, it'll be fine. There's a lot of airfix stuff, there's a lot of cheap stuff you can get, vehicles, a lot of choice. Also, scenery-wise, there's a lot of stuff for railways, etc., that falls into this category. So, again, if I was starting on a blank slate for World War II, I would probably go 20mm. If I was only playing games like maybe Bolt Action or Chain of Command, or that sort of game, if I wasn't, so if I was looking to do bigger games, the other scale that I'd quite like to have been the scale would be 15mm, and magnetize the bases so they can be multi-trade on different group bases depending on what game I played. But I think 20 is a nice one for sort of skirmish games. 15 for anything multi-based. 10 is good if you like loads of armor. I've painted 2,500 points of Warmaster Romans in the lockdown, and I'm currently a little bit sort of 10mm fatigued. I got halfway through the Crusades Army of Saladin and give up. What broke me was I ordered half the points worth of Britons to go against the Romans, and it came and it was a sack of 10mm, and I just looked at it and died a little inside. So as a quick aside, it's good to have the entire army bought and planned, so all the purchases ready before you start the project. In 10mm, it may be, or small scales, it may be very, very daunting. It could be better to buy it unit by unit as you go along, and not overwhelm yourself with a big case of metal fatigue, shall we say. Or as another, before I go,
in 28mm, it's common to use 156 scale tanks and vehicles for World War II. 148 will also do, but it's kind of nicer to have the vehicles not too big and overpowering. And 156 is quite a common one. It's the one bolt action Waller do for bolt action. It's Blitzkrieg do them, and they fit in really nice for things like the parries and the bolt action miniatures. Hope it's been of help. I'm going to probably try and get a couple more quick vids done today for some advanced stuff in Chain Command. I don't know what else to do because obviously I'm stuck solo at the moment and it's absolutely nobblingly cold and we've got about 3 inches of snow, so traipsing into my gaming room was a chore. If you can think of any videos or tutorials or anything that you'd like me to go over, drop a message below. If not, like, subscribe, it helps. We don't get any money from this. It's not monetized. We don't get any sponsors. This is just stuff we do, and seeing some likes and some extra subscribers makes it seem worthwhile. So, thanks for watching, take care, and catch you in the next video.